organization in Austin without grassroots. We're not the grassroots. We're an organization that kind of speaks to y'all and gets the message out. You're the actual people who drive this state in a positive direction. So, Matt mentioned a little bit. I love coming to Fredericksburg. I used to have when I was a kid, we used to hunt kind of on the north side of town here. It's a nice place to be. So I've just enjoyed my hour or so that I've been here already. Like I said, I'm General Counsel for Empower Texans, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Fiscal Responsibility Watchdog Group, kind of a new media entity. We have a publication called the Texas Scorecard. If you want to get a subscription to that, you can check out our website at empowertexans.com and get articles. We did stuff throughout the session, and then we'll continue to do that on a monthly basis. And we put stuff up daily on our website, or generally daily, many times a week. And so it's information about what is actually happening in Austin, and it'll transition a bit. We'll talk about some of the campaigns and things that are going on around the state that are interesting, not just in your local community, but in other corners of the state. So Matt asked me to come up here and talk about what happened with this legislative session, and he has his props, his duct tape, so he has it explode in his blood pressure machine here so that you don't get too riled up. But I want to make a point that while some of the things I'm going to talk about are really outrageous, and some of the things that happen in Austin are really frustrating, I want to make it crystal clear that we are winning right now. We are absolutely winning right now, and we are headed in a positive direction. We had a sit down at the end of this very last day of session. I sat down with trade trainers and outside counsel for ours. I know the lobbyists who I've known. Guys have been kind of inside the legislature for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And they said, I don't know that there's a group that actually, end of the day, big target painted on, Empower Texans and on conservatives. I don't know that there's a group that actually had more success in Austin than us. There are a number of organizations. I went and talked to some folks who work in the legislature. I have a guy who works in the Department of Agriculture for Sid Miller, and I said, who did good this session? They said, nobody really passed anything. Walmart was trying to do a thing. Costco, they all failed. They spent millions of dollars. Tesla showed up. We're going to all have electric cars. That didn't pass. Uber was starting to launch. They couldn't get their bill passed. A lot of stuff didn't happen this session. And so don't get your blood pressure too high about this, because we had a very successful session in the sense that we got a little bit of what we wanted, and the stuff that died in the most fantastic, gruesome, public way that I think it's of a very high political use to us in these coming campaigns. So to talk about what happened in the 84th legislature, I guess the way I wanted to think about it, I kind of asked myself, what is it that the different players wanted to accomplish? In the Senate, you had Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick coming in with a conservative mandate, ran on a campaign of tax cuts, responsible budgeting, doing something about the border, talked about doing something with the liberal Democrats, the Public Integrity Unit in Travis County, which is still prosecuting Rick Perry for issuing the veto, which is insane. Had a platform there. Those were the things that he wanted to accomplish, and do more conservative things than that. That was his big priorities. You had the governor come out and say he had certain emergency legislation he wanted to pass. Now, I don't know how much expanding pre-K is an emergency, but that was his big thing, expanding pre-K. But he wanted ethics legislation that actually focused on elected officials. He wanted doubling of the border security money for actual DPS and National Guard on the border, a couple other items. We had a few things. In the House, what we have to understand in the House is the House right now, the leadership in the House, with Speaker Joe Strauss, is a vestige of a previous era of politics in the state. This was a one-party state, Democrat state, for forever and ever. And the Democratic Party switched to being an extremely liberal party before this state switched to being a Republican state. And so, people don't remember it was until 2002 that there was even a Republican majority in the Texas House. Even with that Republican majority, I was looking at something the other day. In 2006, the Republican House of Representatives That's an income tax. It's called something different, taken out of a different, just taken at a different stage of the operation. But that was an income tax that they passed, and they ended up doing the franchise tax that session in the end, which ended up being a net tax increase because the Democrats, combined with Republican votes, had enough votes to make that project a tax increase. That's what we had in 2006. In 2009, a group of liberal Democrats, a group of liberal Republicans, sometimes you think they're Democrats, got together and teamed up with 64 to 65 liberal Democrats and decided to knock off Tom Craddock, who was the Republican Speaker of the House. They put in Joe Strauss, who has been Speaker since 2009. And the goal, if you understand Strauss, the guy, he had been in about a session and a half. When he showed up, and I learned this recently, when he showed up in Austin, the representatives asked him, said, "Hey, why did you run for office? Why did you run for office?" It was a special election he won. He said, "Well, my mom and dad asked me to run." They kind of wait. What are you here to do? Well, we have this racetrack over in San Antonio, and it's not doing very well, and they feel like if we can get slot machines at that racetrack, we'll be doing a lot better. So I'm here until we get that done. And sometimes I think maybe we need to just give him the slot machine. But that was the guy. He doesn't have a lot of vision. He doesn't have a lot that he wants to do. He's always worked in family business. They sent him up to Washington. They were Republicans. It's a little bit of a misnomer to call him a rhino in a sense, Republican in name only, because it's a bygone era of Republicans in that family. It's an old Rockefeller Republican, extremely liberal Republican, and kind of folks who opposed Reagan. But he went up and worked in the Reagan administration, didn't really do too much there. But I say all of that to give that premise to say there isn't that much that Joe Strauss and the leadership there want. What they want are a few things. He has built himself as the get stuff done guy. You always hear this, oh, those conservatives, they're just rocking the boat. You need a guy who'll get stuff done. Well, they don't really want to do much, but they want to pass the budget. We pass the budget for two reasons. One, because that cosmetic reason. If you get done, well, then you can pat yourself on the back and you say, well, we didn't fail at the one job. The one job they have to do is to pass the budget every 2 years. So the other thing is, if you look back in history, we don't get special sessions where we pass pro-life legislation or other conservative legislation. That doesn't get called as a special session on pro-life legislation. What you end up with is a special session on some fiscal matters bill that had to happen because it didn't pass during the session. And that was the case 2 years ago, the case 4 years ago. There were things that had to pass. And then Governor Perry would come on and tack on some of these social issues that conservatives care about. And whenever a special session's going on, everything's kind of in the open. You can't hide. You can't use the process as easily to kill bills, because if you do it, it just dies in the open and everybody knows that you did it. So one of the reasons they want to pass a budget was they wanted to get out of Dodge by June 1st, so that there wasn't a possibility to be passing stuff to deal with the Supreme Court's coming decision on marriage, or more border security, or sanctuary cities, or pick an issue, a pro-life bill, dealing with the insurance bill that happened in session. They didn't want the opportunity for that. The other thing that they needed to do is, that big block of Republicans there who backed Strauss, they all have to go back home and convince folks like you to vote for him. Doug Miller has to come here and get people in Gillespie County to vote for him. And so he has to check a few boxes and say, I'm pro-life, and I'm pro-gun, and I'm for border security. So they had to do some things there. But remember, this is a governing coalition of liberal Democrats and liberal Republicans that are in control. So they want to do the bare minimum on those things that they could possibly do. That was, from my point of view, the goal on the House side. So where did we actually end up in this session? What you saw was the Senate leading on conservative issues and not getting everything that they wanted to the floor. At the very first day, they got rid
two-thirds rule. And what you have to understand about the two-thirds rule, this is a rule that's gone back about 60 years in the state, back when we were a one-party state. And it effectively gave the Democratic caucus a veto, just as much as the governor has a veto. If they stood together, they had a veto over any piece of policy in this state. They could say no to anything. They could say no to Second Amendment rights, pro-life bills. They got rid of that. But it still took 19 votes to bring something to the Senate floor. And so on the Senate side, you had conservative leadership, conservative bills move, but you still had sanctuary cities fail. You still had, pro-life bills did not move all that quickly. School choice legislation that was being conceived, some of that stuff didn't really come out all that strong. And frankly, that goes back to you still have 3 or 4 or 5 fairly liberal Republicans in the Republican caucus in the Senate holding those bills up. Craig Estes killed sanctuary cities very publicly, and that was actually a spitting match between him and Charles Perry of Lubbock, just over who got to be chairman of the Water Committee. But nonetheless, the Senate passed pretty conservative bills. Passed property tax reform, passed, actually there were some other property tax reform bills that did move because of some of those same actors. But passed property tax reform, passed a budget that is pretty conservative, stays below population and inflation. Passed a bill, got very public here at the end, the business community cared about, to shut off the public sector unions from taking money directly out of our government employees' paychecks. I didn't know that until this session, that if you work for a state agency and there's a government union, they come in and they take the money before you, just like Uncle Sam, they take that money before you ever see a penny of it. We facilitate that as a state for no real reason. They reformed that in places like Illinois, and finally a bill like that got traction here in Texas. Public Integrity Unit bill moved. This is an interesting thing. Did anybody here, show of hands, anybody follow what happened with Wallace Hall, UT? Couple of you? There's a corruption scandal going on over the interim at the University of Texas. And they actually had a great article that I'll encourage you to read, a website called watchdog.org. It has a Texas bureau. And over the interim, what you found out was these politicians in the House, particularly, and some senators, were greasing the skids over at UT to get unqualified family members, either their own kids or family members of donors or folks who worked in their offices, into UT and UT Law School. You had a report today, watchdog.org showed over the last 10 years, and particularly in the mid-2000s, you had folks getting into UT Law that were in like the bottom 10% of test takers nationwide, getting accepted even though that's, top-tier law school my alma mater. You have a very brave regent, a guy named Wallace Hall, on the Board of Regents, starts investigating this stuff. And what does the House leadership do? They start to investigate him, basically saying he's asking too many questions. He was sending open records requests to the university to get documents. And it blows my mind that a regent who runs the place has to go with an open records request just like you or I have to get documents out of him. Well, they said, you're abusing your office. They tried to impeach him. They failed. But even when they failed to impeach him, they referred and used the Travis County the Democratic run Travis County District Attorney's Office as a threat to try to prosecute Hall for asking too many questions, for asking for these documents. And sure enough, that failed. But it showed the need. I mentioned Governor Perry and the indictment of Governor Perry for his veto of the funds. The DA was drunk driving and such. So that bill actually moved out of the Senate. And I think what's interesting in that case, the bill was conceived to take that Travis County DA's office, or the Public Integrity Unit. Public Integrity Unit is very interesting. It prosecutes crimes by public officials, like insurance fraud, and like if they lie about the price of a gas pump. It's like a really weird 3 items. But anyway, so it has been doing this, and they've been doing malicious prosecutions going back to Tom DeLay. Kay Bailey Hutchison, when she first won her election, she was prosecuted. She was acquitted. They took her to trial. She was acquitted in an hour when they indicted her, literally. But we've we've been trying to do something about this for a long time. And the thought was, we'll take this thing and we'll put it in the Republican statewide elected Attorney General's office to do it. And I think that the liberal Republicans thought we were trying to set up Ken Paxton, who was a good conservative. And so their big switcheroo was, oh, they won't go for this, we'll move it to the Department of Public Safety and the Texas Rangers. And I think all the conservatives said, well, we don't care where it goes, so long as somebody qualified to do the investigation. The other thing was, we give a bunch of money to the Travis County DA's office to do all this investigation. And what the House ended up fighting for, kind of liberal Republicans in the Senate, Kel Seliger, Joan Huffman, a couple of Republicans in the Senate that kind of opposed the Lieutenant Governor's agenda, what they wanted to do was leave all that money there, but then just move the politician prosecution to someplace else. And so I guess you take half a loaf when you get it. Anyway, so all these bills went over to the House, and what the House did was basically try to slow play, delay, and destroy as many of these bills as possible. Instead of property tax reform, and I think everybody in here knows property taxes are too high, appraisals are rising, everybody just got their appraisals in Austin. There's folks who, I don't know how bad it is here, in Austin the appraisals went up, in many cases 22, 24, 26% in a year, which is insane. But property taxes is an important issue, and instead the House said, oh, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to mess with the sales tax, because everybody's been scrambling for sales tax relief, and they put that forward as a competing thing. When the Senate passed a franchise tax cut to the franchise tax was passed in 2006, the House said, no, we had to change that, tinker it around, do it completely different, trying to create a conflict. Budget, you passed a really not a very good budget in the House. The House budget didn't do about half of what the Senate did on border security. They put that forward. At the end of the day, the House, what ends up happening, close to the end of the session, you see that they fold on the issues that don't affect the political establishment in Austin. Another one I need to mention, the Senate passed, 94% of Republicans are for a strong constitutional spending cap to limit the growth of government to population plus inflation. The Senate passed that out of the Senate as well. When those bills got to the House, the Speaker is supposed to dole those out to a committee so they can move through the process. He sat on many of those bills, including open carry, campus carry, constitutional carry, well, no constitutional carry test, but open carry, campus carry, the tax bills, dedicated transportation funding, funding the roads. Sat on it for 30, 40 days. Just sat there and delayed. They wouldn't send it to a committee. They wouldn't let the members actually work on it. And then in the last 2 weeks, they started to break loose and start to move things. And what they moved were the things that don't threaten the political establishment in the House. They moved, they ended up folding on the property tax reform. They ended up folding on the budget. They ended up folding on the franchise tax reform. Those kind of things, it's just a pocket of things. We got those wins at the end of the day. I mean, in fact, the word in Austin was when the House and Senate budget conferees went in to the conference committee together, they said the House members got rolled. They just completely got beat. But what did they actually destroy? I mentioned earlier spending caps. They destroyed that spending cap bill. They took it and the second to last day, to say that they passed something, they passed a bill that literally would have made our spending cap in the state worse. It split all of the budget, spending into 6 different categories. And said that they could pick any limit that they wanted on the 6 different categories. Basically, there would have been no limit. We would have done away with the limit that we have now and watered down and destroyed what the Senate had done, and what we're actually living under as a political practice right now. That was killed in the House. And the reason that is again, everybody in Austin is clamoring for a piece of the pie. They all want some money. The lobby wants some dollars for something that they're looking for. And so if you limit the growth of government, it just fundamentally stops the handouts. And so that had to die, because you have to maintain that Democrat, liberal, Republican governing coalition. I mentioned earlier that union bill. That union bill $7 million every year to the Democratic Party out of Texas. Goes in the unions send it to Washington, Washington sends it down for Battleground Texas and the different projects that they do. That bill goes into and is referred to the State Affairs Committee with State Rep. Byron Cook. And Byron Cook says, no, not going to move that bill. In fact, the word is he made a promise to one of the unions that he'd kill him. Big enchilada, really, to me, is, and I got to talk about this ethics bill. So I mentioned earlier, I kind of have focused on this. This was the governor's big priority was an ethics bill. There was a bill moved by Senator Van Taylor in the Senate, and what this bill would have done is it would have actually shed some light for the first time since 1991 on elected officials and how they're making their money. It would have required, well, it's not a number, a no-brainer kind of thing. If you're an elected official and you're convicted of bribery, you wouldn't get your pension. Everybody nods in agreement. Obviously, everybody's for that. It would have required them to expose when they have contracts with a government entity. So up in Tarrant County, there was a state representative, Vicki Truitt, who had a contract with a local hospital district as, some kind of consultant. Well, guess what? As soon as she wasn't a state representative, they didn't need to pay her as a hospital consultant anymore. But the voters didn't really have an easy way of knowing that. Yeah, right. It's just a coincidence that she lost the contract after she's out, after she was defeated in an election. Would have required that. Would have required, I don't know if anybody followed what happened in the state of New York with the Speaker of the House, state of New York. He's an attorney, and attorneys can take referral fees. Like if you go in and meet with an attorney, and then he refers your case to another attorney, there could be an arrangement, you have to disclose it, but there could be an arrangement where he'll take part of the other guy's fee, kind of a finder's fee. Well, it's very open to becoming bribery whenever you're a state representative or a state senator or a statewide official, because essentially you're getting paid to do nothing at all, just to bring a client into the guy. Well, that was with the big bribery scandal in New York. That was in the ethics bill the Senate passed. The Senate passed a thing right now, this is amazing. In the city of Austin, lobbyists can take a rep out to dinner on a given day, and he can spend up to $125 whining and dining that legislator. And if he gets 2 lobbyists there, they spend $250. And if you get 3, it's $375. That gets to be a pretty good party if you get enough lobbyists together. But they can take them out without ever having to file any paperwork to disclose. You'll literally never see any paperwork. Everybody, the word is whenever you take them out, no, you don't need to, make sure I don't show up on a report. It's kind of the directive to the lobbyists. And they all take them out to dinner, wine and dine. And more than that. They would have had the bill would have reduced it to $50. That was part of that package of legislation. I'm trying to think of different items in there, but it was
cooling off period before you
yeah. There was a revolving door statute. So right now, everybody knows this. How many of former elected officials you know of? They retire. They say they're not running for election again. Well, what do they do in the next session? They're down in Austin. They're lobbying for something for the most bucks. And in fact, what some of them do is stick around long enough to get a campaign coffers going, enough money in their treasury for their campaign fund, and then they use that to dole out to representatives to their campaigns as part of their lobby operation. That's a very typical thing in the city of Austin right now. So all of this was put together, and it wasn't a perfect bill, and it could have done more, but it was a great bill. Every bit of it was directed at elected officials, shedding light on elected officials. Goes over to the House. And the word is that the House is absolutely committed on behalf of, there's actually literally a lobby for the lobby. It's like a lobbyist have an organization called Professional Advocacy Association of Texas, PAAT, lobbyists. Anyway, that they wanted that bill dead. And so the House set to work to do it. Bill shows up in committee, State Affairs. State Affairs is the most powerful committee in the House. Has basically any bill can go through there. It's where all of the illegal immigration-oriented stuff died. The committee chairman, one of the original supporters of Strauss, there was a bill to end in-state tuition for illegal immigrants that Jonathan Stickland filed. Went there. He told Stickland, "There's no way licenses. So, and he's a Republican, but or at least calls himself one. This is the guy who gets a hold, like he did with the union bill that goes to benefit the Democrats. He gets a hold of this ethics bill. And the word was, literally, when this bill passed the Senate, there was a couple of Democrats, one of the Democrats from, I believe, Dallas, who it passed, and he said, well, it's nice knowing him. I mean, there were politicians who knew they had to retire because they would not be able to make a living anymore if that bill passed. It goes to the State Affairs Committee. They tinker with it, and part of the backstory on the bill that got included in this, but it came out kind of at the last minute. They moved this bill out, and they had cut away the revolving door provision. The contract thing, this was pretty cute what they did. They took the provision that dealt with legislators, exposing what government contracts they had, and they took it so it didn't include if it was a contract with the legislator's business. So I don't know how many of you have your own business or do business, have your own company, but it's usually not, you're not doing business with Tony McDonald. You're doing business with Tony McDonald LLC or something like that. Well, all the legislator would have had to do was, Rep Smith LLC, and then it didn't have to get reported. That was the House version of that provision. They went in and gutted out there was a provision, there's a State Board of Education member named Thomas Ratliff, I didn't mention this, who is a registered lobbyist while serving on the State Board of Education. He represents Microsoft and the voters of District whatever. And so, I would suggest you can't serve two masters. But anyway, they gutted that provision out. They were okay with people being simultaneously legislators and state officials and lobbyists. They put a provision in there. There's a provision in law. They came up with this out of nowhere. They put a provision in the bill. Right now, there's a statute that says if you're an elected official and you have a vote on something, you're not supposed to vote on something that directly financially interests you. And quite frankly, that law is very almost meaningless. It's very, very watered down. The reason being is they say if it affects everybody equally, it doesn't affect just you, well then you don't really have to vote for it. They literally took that provision, which doesn't mean much, and turned it on its head, and they said, well, if it affects you individually, then you have to disclose it. If it affects your business, it wouldn't have included if it affected a business that they own. But here's an interesting deal where they were trying to catch conservative legislators. If you voted for a negative incentive, like a tax cut that was business, statewide, and it affected your business, that would have been illegal. It would have been against the law. That came out of that committee. But that's we said, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's the good, the bad, and now there's the ugly. Cook directed his bill not at elected officials, public officials. He directed his bill at you, Tea Party, us, empowered Texans, conservatives. The bill came out, and I'll go through these provisions. It literally violated with speech regulation provisions every single clause in the First Amendment: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition. They put a bill in there that had died earlier in the year called House Bill 37. They put the contents of that bill into the bill, and what it would have said was a group like this. Do you have any entity or y'all, a corporation or
Texas nonprofit.
Texas nonprofit. Okay, so you're directly targeted by this. So a nonprofit corporation. Let's say you thought, well, maybe we want to spend some money to support or oppose a local school bond. They would have regulated it and required you to file paperwork, and would have been every donor, every transaction that this organization done. That pot of money back there, that donation can, no. Because you have to know every single person who gave money to the organization, and how much, and what the date was, and what their occupation was, and what their employer was, And if it was a company, you didn't know whether it was a corporation or if it was a labor union. I don't know why a labor union gets the Tea Party, but if it was labor union, you could have to know that too. It actually hit churches, so it didn't discriminate between people who get involved independently. And I'm talking about independent spending, your own speech in an election. It didn't distinguish between candidate elections and elections on a measure. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with the story from Houston, or the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. It's the bathroom ordinance in Houston, where they subpoenaed the pastor's sermons. Ted Cruz was out on that. So anyway, those churches that spent money to get involved in that referendum election, or trying to get that referendum election going and doing the petitions, those churches would have had to disclose every person who gave the church money and how much. That means the collection plate. In fact, it means you no longer get to pass the collection plate. Because, you pass a collection plate, you don't know how much each person gives. They put cash in it, how much they give, what the date was, what their occupation is, what their employer is. They wanted to regulate you and me and every citizen of this state like they're a candidate for office. They put that into the bill. But it wasn't just there. What was really amazing was the media, and liberal media in Austin, is always defending Strauss and the kind of liberal coalition that runs the House. Liberal media in Austin said, oh, wow, they call it dark money because, they need to know what your contributors are. But anyway, they said they made this the dark money bill. Well, the funniest thing was they put a provision in there attacking directly at journalists. See, in this state, journalists have something called a shield law protection. If they're in a lawsuit and somebody sues them, they actually don't have to disclose the source of a story that they write. It's designed to protect First Amendment freedom of the press. A person can give you an anonymous story. It would have stripped away the shield law protection from anybody who ever in their life spent $100 on independent political speech. So you as citizens would have to make the choice. If you were going to write a story, and everybody does journalism now, Facebook, Twitter, it's all freedom of the press. It really is. Don't kid yourself that you're something different than the New York Times. You're writing to your friends, neighbors, and your community about what happens whenever you're out there on social media and doing those things. You would have to make a choice. Do you want to spend $100? Let's say you wanted to build a sign in your front yard that said, vote for Bob. If you built a sign that said, vote for Bob, or vote against the school bond, and you spent $100 doing that, they would have taken away the shield law protection, one of your rights in a lawsuit to protect you. I don't know why the journalists weren't screaming, but I do know why, because they don't think that it'll ever apply to them. They went in for a while now. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what has been going on with my boss at Empire, Texas, Michael Quinn Sullivan. Where they allege that he was a lobbyist because we do our fiscal responsibility index. I mean, how many, show of hands, that people, handful know about that story. Basically, last session, two lieutenants of the Speaker of the House came in and filed complaints with the Texas Ethics Commission, and they said that putting out an index, a scorecard that says, this was a good vote, this was a bad vote, that was lobbying, and that he had to pay $750 to the state of Texas for the privilege of doing it. And we said, bump to that, and we've been fighting them 2 years now, spent probably $500,000 to fight them. But we've won in district court, and we're up at the Court of Appeals in Fort Worth now. But they went in and said, here's the thing. The reason we were able to win that, because the game is completely rigged at the Ethics Commission there in Austin. The reason we were able to win is we were able to file an appeal in a real court in front of a real judge. Because that's your constitutional right to due process. They can't come and take your money or accuse you of breaking the law without going in front of a real court. Well, we have to do the song and dance in front of the bureaucrats first, and then we went to a real court. And we won. First hearing we had in front of the real judge, they said, this case doesn't hold water, we win, and we're fighting about whether they're going to pay us back our attorney's fees. There's been a push by those bureaucrats to say, let's get rid of that full right of review by a judge. Let's put the burden on the citizen who's accused to prove his case in an appeal, not make the government actually go prove their case against you in a court. And we want to get rid of it. It's called de novo review. A trial de novo, a new trial is the Latin. So they want to get rid of that. The bureaucrats want to get rid of that. But the elected officials have pushed back and they say, well, we don't want to get rid of that because we go to the Ethics Commission too, because we file all this paperwork, and sometimes we file it wrong, or sometimes we're corrupt, or whatever. And they want to be able to win those cases. So what did they do in this bill? They carved out and said, well, we're going to take away the trial de novo for citizens who are accused of lobbying, but not for anybody else. So it was a special right of appeal for public officials, but taken away from you and me. No, it did not. End of the story, it did not. So, most amazing thing in the bill, truly, was what they tacked on to the end. I don't know if anybody has been paying attention to this story about the American Phoenix Foundation. It's a group that's been filming the legislators in Austin covertly. And the news came out about a month ago. They've been hanging out in the bars and watching what happens, and just supposedly some pretty lascivious stuff. Well, I think so, but it's up to them. The reaction, it has rocked Austin and blown a lot of these legislators' minds that they are being filmed. And I think let's put it this way, every guilty conscience is sweating bullets, waiting for those tapes to come out. Because they don't know whether their bad deed was on tape or not, if they did it out in public.
With their lobbyists.
Well, yeah. Anyway. And this story happened. What they put into the bill was this. And this is, I joked, I said if they really wanted to be unconstitutional, they should have, the guy's name is Joe Basil, who runs the group. Hannah Giles, I don't know if you remember from the Acorn video stings, the James O'Keefe thing. Anyway, that's her husband. They're married, and she's kind of runs that group. But anyway, so Joe and Hannah, I said if they really wanted to be unconstitutional, they should have done the whole work corruption of blood and just banned their children from owning land. Because I can't think of anything that would be more unconstitutional. Maybe that is the only thing more unconstitutional than what they did. They said, we're going to ban, in this state, a little background, in this state we're blessed with a law of one-party consent. That means that if you're on the phone with somebody, you can record that conversation, legally entitled to record that conversation. And the same thing goes with a video camera. If you're standing there with a video camera, you can record a conversation. And you don't have to get the permission of the other person to do it. It's statewide, it's the law here, it's not the law everywhere in the country, but it's the law in most places, with the exception of a handful of liberal states. They came out with a law that said, we're going to do away with one-party consent and do two-party consent, but only in the Texas Capitol building. Seriously.
Retroactively.
And because it's so important that people be able to talk to their elected officials, we're going to presume that any conversation with an elected official that was intended to be private. And what we're going to do is we're going to assume that if you record somebody in the Capitol, we're going to assume that they meant for that conversation to be private. And if you do that, they can sue you to get an injunction. Now, first of all, that's what's called a prior restraint. The one thing that everybody agrees the First Amendment prohibits is a prior restraint. The idea that I can say to you, you have something you want to say or some video you want to put out or whatever, and I can go, I'm going to stop you. Not that I'm going to sue you later. It's I'm going to stop you before you do it. They put a prior restraint in it, and it right to an injunction in the bill. They didn't just do that. They put in there a $10,000 statutory penalty so that the legislator could sue the citizen for $10,000 plus actual damages, plus their attorney's fees, plus a protection called the Citizens Participation Act, that is supposed to protect the First Amendment doesn't apply to this type of case. No joke.
Remind everybody that we're still on Senate Bill 19.
This is Senate Bill 19. This is the ethics bill directed at public officials. The unanimously passed good bill out of the Senate. This is in that bill. This is what it would have meant. If you called and you said, you know, I'm curious what Doug Miller, let's pick on Doug Miller because he's representative. I'm curious what Doug Miller would say if I asked him a question, where do you stand on property tax cuts? So you called his office. He said, I'd like to speak to Representative Miller. He said, sure. For some stroke of luck, they said, sure, we'll let you talk to Representative Miller. It didn't really work that way, but let's say you did. Or let's say it's his staff. It doesn't really matter. And you talk to him, and he said, you know what, I'm going to record this. Doug, what do you think about property tax cuts? And he says, well, you know, I don't really stand for that, whatever. Click, hang up. That would have been illegal. That would have been you getting Doug Miller alone. You didn't get the right to sue Doug Miller. Doug Miller can sue you for $10,000, and you don't have a way to end the case until it goes to trial. And he gets his attorney's fees if he wins, and he can get an injunction against you. Now, there's this really cool thing called the First Amendment and the Constitution, and that literally is never, ever going to be the law, no matter how hard they try. Ever would require, all the legislatures to approve a constitutional amendment to make it the law. So do not fret that even if the governor signed it, that will never be the law. But that's what they passed out of the committee. Oh, and I'll get to this. They pass it and they take it to the floor for debate. And it's on the very last night, and it's sitting in front of a bill to ban insurance companies from covering abortions. And it's sitting in front of a bill for campus carry, for Second Amendment rights, for CHLs, and now will be HLs, open carry, for handgun license holders to carry a firearm on a college campus. Those two bills are sitting behind Senate Bill 19, plus actually a couple other pieces of legislation. They take the bill to the floor. Representative Cook comes out there to lay it out, and the conservatives say, why don't you postpone this bill until after we get this important pro-life bill done? And he says, no, not going to do it. This is important. And they spend the next 3 hours debating this Frankenstein monster of a Senate Bill 19 on the floor. Representative Matt Schaefer, who's a conservative from Tyler, a great man, is a great representative, one of the guys who's actually fighting for people like you and me, brought an amendment and said, we've got to get rid of this unconstitutional, we're going to ban people from filming bill. And so he had an amendment to get that out of it. And during the debate on that, it was revealed, David Simpson, another conservative from Longview, ran for speaker a couple of sessions ago, and he's just a great man, good, humble man, came to the microphone and very sincerely said, I don't know if everybody in here understands what this bill does, but it doesn't just apply going forward. It applies to the videos shot this session by the American Phoenix Foundation. It was an unconstitutional retroactive law to ban the release of the very videos that these guys are afraid of. Now, I don't know what they have on those tapes, but that makes me think there's some really nasty stuff going on in the state capitol. It was in the Capitol building. It wasn't banning the stuff at the bar. It's in the building. They vote on that amendment, and the House votes. A majority of Republicans vote against it, or vote to remove it. But a majority of the representatives vote to keep that unconstitutional, retroactive ban on recording a state legislator in the bill. 74 to 67, something like that. They voted a clean vote. Matt Rinaldi, good conservative freshman legislator from Irving, is a real champion this session. He's out there fighting It's actually most famous time, one of the best parts of the session. During the budget debate, he had an amendment to get rid of, we have a film subsidies program in the state where we give money for filmmakers. Well, he pointed out that we had given a bunch of money to some movie called Mongolian Death Worm. And Jason Isaac, who's not far from here, state representative, came and defended giving money to Mongolia. How much money, how many jobs did we create giving money to Mongolian Death Worm? That's like a sci-fi, original film. And it was a great moment. Matt Rinaldi looked at it and he said, honestly, would you sit down with any business owner in this state and look them in the eye and say that the $50,000 that they paid in franchise taxes this year was better spent making Mongolian Death Worm than staying in their business, being invested in their business? And pretty well shut the debate down. Now, he lost the amendment, but he kind of won the debate. Anyway, Matt Rinaldi, great man, did an amendment that would have been a clean vote. It would have reverted the bill back, this horrible, not ethics, speech suppression, unconstitutional bill, would have just reverted it back to the version that passed out of the Senate. And when the representatives had an opportunity to vote on whether they wanted ethics reform for themselves or banning recording legislators and banning the collection plate, about 35 Republicans voted for it, and that was it. Pitiful. Truly pitiful. Bill passes out of the House. It goes to the Senate. The Senate and the conservatives in the Senate said, no way, no how are we going to pass this thing. They sent it to a conference committee. And Senator Van Taylor came to him and said, look, I don't care. We can compromise. It's fine. We can either do the bill that we did here in the Senate, or we can take just the provisions that deal with elected officials, even as watered down as they are. We can take just those provisions that the House and Senate agreed on, and there were a handful of those things, and we can pass that. And instead of that, the state representatives, Byron Cook, Speaker of the House, said, the bill is graveyard dead. And it died. Which was good, because I like, being free to speak to you. So.
You remember the vote count out of the House?
Say what?
The vote count out of the House?
Vote count out of the House.
47 against
46 Republicans voted.
No, 40. I thought it was 48 Republicans voted against the bill. 46 Republicans voted for it, and then all the Democrats voted for the bill. So it was good to see a majority of the Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
There absolutely is a record of it, yes. If you go on the state website and you search Senate Bill 19, I don't know the record book, but I actually look it up for you here when we're done, and I'll tell you what the number is. But you can know, and I believe Miller, voted, was part of the group that voted for it. It is truly, to me, a test of a representative. I don't care where you stand on spending or taxes. The debate on the bill was actually fascinating. Jessica Farrar, the most pro-abortion legislator from Houston, was this radically liberal woman from Houston, was out there, and she was criticizing Matt Schaefer when he brought that amendment. She said, this is an important protection for us. Why are you trying to get rid of this important protection for us? We're scared of these guys with these video cameras. That was the debate. So, that's the ugliest thing that happened this session. But it was very revealing, and at the end of the day, we won. We didn't pass it. It didn't pass. And we know exactly where our legislators stand, whether they're working for you, or whether they're working for their own self-interest, whether they care about their oath to the Constitution, or whether, they don't care. I have a couple little vignettes, little stories that I can tell, but I think, where are we on time? Maybe I can open it up for questions and then run off a few.
Yeah, you got 25 minutes, including Q&A.
Okay. Well, let me do that. Let's get a little break here and go to Q&A, and then I've got a couple of good stories, some that'll make you mad. Let me tell a story. Does anybody here care about the American Law for American Courts bill?
Yeah, amen.
Okay. And that's a real, I mean, people said, oh, well, that's kind of a pie in the sky, maybe it'll be a problem down the line. I mean, there is a Sharia law court in, the Metroplex right now. So that is an issue that is worth dealing with. And they had a very good bill sponsored by Jeff Leach in the House. And he brought that bill out. And he got it voted out of committee. Well, Matt will remember this. We met on Tuesday. There's a final week there, about 2 weeks before the end of the legislative session, where they pass House bills. And they had set calendars for a couple days, and I said, looking at the number of bills put on these calendars, about 20 pages worth of calendars, listing off bills that they're going to go through, I said, we're not really going to make it past Monday night. Where we're supposed to get done Monday night is going to be where we're going to be Thursday night. That's where we're going to end up. And anything that's put on that Wednesday calendar is just a complete no way. It's a goner. And if they put it on the Thursday calendar, they're putting their finger in your eye because they're pretending to vote for something that they know never in a million trillion years is ever going to get to the floor of the House. Well, guess where they put the American Law for American Courts bill? The very last substantive bill on the Thursday calendar for the very last day. So if anyone says to you, oh, well, we got it on a calendar, we just ran out of time, they are lying to your face. They killed it. They knew they were killing it. I think they killed it because the grassroots cared about it. That was one of their opportunities to kind of push back. I don't know if there was enough political power behind it. They wanted to kill it. They did that. And then whenever the Senate version had an opportunity to be put on the calendar, you had Republicans at the last minute voting to kill it in the calendars committee on the last day. So that was truly amazing. It was so transparent that they were basically sticking their finger in the eye of everybody who cared about that bill, if you understand how the process works in Austin. And what they hope is that you don't understand how the process works. They say, oh, well, we just ran out of time. They didn't run out of time. They stuck their finger in your eye. So anyway, let's go to questions here.
Yeah, something I've been wondering about since Joe Strauss has been in office, and I keep hearing these stories that legislators, if they want to get a good committee assignment or something, they have to sign a card dedicating themselves to Joe Strauss and his programs. Is that true or not?
Well, so pledge cards used to be a very, very common practice in the House. Back in the Craddock days and the early Strauss days, they used physical pledge cards. And then kind of there was a lot of criticism of that because I think, rightly so, constituents go, wait a second, you pledged to serve me, not some guy you signed a card to. Literally, at the end of session, Craddock used to have they'd have an ice cream social at the end of it, and here's the cards. If you wanted to be anything good or not get primary, you sign the card. And it was just appropriate. Well, actually, a handful got on appropriations. There's so many, about 30 of them on appropriations, but they're outnumbered about 3 or 4 to 1 by Democrats there. And so really, they have no impact on that process. So it's a big false thing. I wrote a piece about this for Empowered Texans in February whenever the committee assignments came out. And the point I made was what you're trading, it's a false trade. If you're an official, then Sticklin proves this. Sticklin was listed as one of the 10 most effective members in Austin by Mike Haley, who's a kind of Capital Insight it's called Capital Insight. And he said he's one of the 10 most effective. He did it strictly by using parliamentary tactics, debating from the back microphone. They wouldn't let him lay out his own amendment. They wouldn't let him lay out an amendment whenever he was right. But he was effective by being a dissenting voice, by fighting the system that's there. What you do whenever you vote for the speaker is you say, okay, give me something good. Give me one of these good committees. And I will give up my right to say no. That's the trade. The right to say no, the right to fight is actually more important than any committee assignment. Because you're not going to be the chairman of the committee. You're not going to run the calendars. There's still going to be 2 or 3 layers of protection, even if your committee is conservative and passes conservative stuff. So it's no guarantee. And in fact, a lot of times what they talk about is they say, well, a certain committee is lucrative. He'll talk about energy resources, deals with oil and gas, is lucrative. And what they mean is the lobby, the oil and gas lobby, needs legislation to get through that committee. They make big campaign contributions to the committee members, and then they expect their bills to move through. And so, yeah, if you're the kind of person who goes to Austin to sell out and say, I'm going to move legislation based off of who gave me campaign contributions, maybe it does count what committee you're on. But if you're the kind of person who's going to do it the right way, frankly, everybody gets on 2 committees and they can do some work wherever they do their work. So it's just such a false dichotomy. It's such a false narrative, this concept that you're going to get anything for voting for the speaker.
Yeah, Tony, maybe a quick question. What do you think the prospect is for a special session?
0.
Okay, since that was yes or no, do I have another question?
Sure, go ahead.
What's the scorecard on Andy Murray?
Not out yet, and I actually can't recall where he is. We were working on it. It'll be out in about a week or so. Should be out pretty quickly, and I don't remember the specific number. I will tell you this, and I was describing it earlier to a guy I was talking to. Didn't have the worst voting record, didn't have the best voting record. Quite frankly, I would go back and look at that Senate Bill 19. There's a couple other votes that really stood out to me where it was a principle. You know, sometimes you can be wrong. But
He's the only one.
He was a no vote.
He was a no vote on it.
Of the 4 reps in this area, so Miller, Isaac, Murr, and Farney, the other 3 all voted for it. He was the only one who voted against it.
Yeah, that sounds right. So, you know, so he certainly not as bad as a record as Miller, but I can't remember the score. So anyway, look forward to the website and our Twitter account and everything else. It'll be out in a week or so. And quickly on the special session, you know, there was a little bit of a push to do something with the Supreme Court's marriage decision. I think there's a lot of things that were left undone. You know, I said earlier that the big goal this session for the Strauss people was pass, you know, kind of one bill on this, one bill on that. There's a lot of pro-life legislation that died. An insurance bill that was after the ethics bill, that bill died because they spent 3 hours debating speech regulation.
Ethics was one of the top 5, though.
And ethics was a thing for the governor, but anyway, but the governor has been pretty clear he's not going to call a special, and say what you will of that.
Okay, I've got this thing going on here in my head, and what I'm hearing you say on this legislation, like on the Senate Bill 19.
Right.
Okay, it's something that as citizens we all get behind, and we're happy. We're saying yes. Look, this is what we want. This is good. It's going to regulate and it's going to clean things up. And the Senate passes it. It's a clean bill. And then what you're saying is it goes over to the House side, and they intentionally muddy it up.
Correct.
They intentionally muddy it up to the point that it's absolutely horrible, knowing that it could never ever pass in the end.
Correct.
But somehow or another, they managed to pass parts of it that's actually horrible, and then we're saying, "Oh my God, we don't want this Senate Bill 19. I'm so glad it failed." But we wanted it to begin with.
It was a good bill out of the Senate.
But they make an emotional roller coaster out of it for us.
Correct.
To what we wanted,
Correct.
and then we don't want.
Well, and look, that's the thing. Patricia Harless, state representative out of Houston, quite liberal. In fact, it's almost funny. You go through her bills thought, you know, that's a bad idea. That's another bad idea. Another bad idea. Anyway, you're going through them. She put out a Facebook message about the bill, and she was defending the bill, but she said, well, yeah, don't worry so much about that. That bill was never going to pass both houses. You know, we knew it was never going to pass both houses. So it was kind of an admission, a useful admission from them. They knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't think that they were going to pass banning the collection plate, banning filming in the Capitol, and all that kind of stuff. Now, why they decided to put all that junk, I don't know. There's different things they could have done, but they were really trying to kill that transparency for their own records. and for their own expenditures.
Yeah, but guess what they did? They gave us a vote that showed where they stood.
Yeah, that's the thing. At the end of the day, we can wait. I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, conservatives, it's not like we're out there clamoring for bills. When bills die, we can deal with that. So we have nothing but time, and now we know where everybody stands. So it's very useful.
Yes, I was interested in the Public Integrity Unit.
Mm-hmm.
Is it still in the Travis County District Attorney's Office?
So, yeah, to get a little more on that, so what they did, the Public Integrity Unit and the money, like $3 or $4 million or something like that, is still in the Travis County District Attorney's Office. But what they passed was a law, and in some ways it's good because it shuts down that hyper-political prosecution by liberal Democrats in Travis County of politicians. But it actually creates a different system for state officials, state employees, and public officials to say, well, if they are going to be prosecuted, they have to be prosecuted not by the local DA, but by a visiting district attorney in their home county. And so, Doug Miller, let's say Doug Miller takes a bribe in Austin. And the logic of why the Travis County DA's office has always had this is, let's say Doug Miller takes a bribe in Austin. Well, he committed a crime in Austin. And so that's the logic is you'd have that DA, prosecuting. Now, the problem with it is that DA is elected by all liberal Democrats in an extremely Republican state. And so, let's not call it extremely a Republican state. And they would be able to go after, as they have, go after politicians they don't like. What it will do now is, if there is a complaint against Doug Miller that says he's, took a bribe, it'll go to the Texas Rangers. And the Texas Rangers will take an initial look at the case, and if there's reasonable suspicion there to prosecute, they will then refer it, and they would send it down to Comal County, and you would have a district attorney, potentially the district attorney of Gillespie County or Llano County or wherever, would bring people into Comal County, and they would prosecute him in Comal County. That's a good, I think all things considered, it's a good reform, and quite frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong with prosecuting people in their hometown. If the voters who elected you, those are the people who are truly wronged if somebody abuses their office, and so I think they're the folks who should be sitting on the jury and judging. But what didn't happen is other things that happen in Travis County. So a citizen who does something that is the politicians don't like, that very well still could be prosecuted in Travis County. And so it's done to some extent away with the whole Ronnie Earl going after Tom DeLay or them going after Governor Perry. That kind of stuff is probably at an end because of the bill that passed. But it's not a pure reform like what was originally proposed. Something to celebrate, but not quite the whole enchilada.
What is it going to take to make the nightmare for the bad boys come to fruition with the American Phoenix?
Well, I mean, maybe you have to talk to those guys. If you think back to these O'Keefe,
Let me know, I'll contribute.
If you think about these O'Keefe projects, they usually have a slow rollout of pieces of video that they have. And in politics, and this is a little gruesome, but you'll remember it forever and ever. There's an old motto: don't fire all your ammunition at once. And so so the other way to put it is, if you had a puppy dog and you wanted to clip his tail off and you wanted to make it hurt as much as possible, you wouldn't just go and clip the base of the tail. You'd clip the end of the tail, and then you'd clip it again, and then you'd clip it again, and you'd clip it again, and you'd clip it again. I would expect those guys to do that to these guys, the bad actors in Austin. You're going to see one video, and then you're going to see the next video, and then you're going to see the next video.
Well, they must have 20 hours on Charlie Guerin alone.
Charlie has a bar in his office.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much he was out in front of the camera. Yeah. Well, we'll see what comes out. But it'll be interesting to see what those guys do. Quite frankly, the overreaction. I mean, you've seen some of these guys running out there and they have their iPhones out and like, I'm filming you. It's just silliness. It's crazy. So you're going to see some pretty interesting stuff. And frankly, what happened with Senate Bill 19 is part of the effects of that bill. I mean, we had these guys completely overreact, vote to, Ben Wetmore, who's an attorney for American Phoenix Foundation, tweeted out, and he said, now I can add, got the First Amendment repealed in Texas to my resume. So, they voted to repeal the First Amendment, and now we all know who wants to repeal the First Amendment. So we've gotten a lot out of this deal, and there hasn't been 1 second of video out there yet. So, but you'll have to talk to them. I really don't know what exactly they're planning to do. Pretty interesting, pretty powerful stuff.
Sir, thank you for coming.
Oh yeah, no thanks.
My wife and I did the grassroots legislation work for the Texas wine industry in Austin and D.C. I'm not much of a person for shoulda, woulda, and coulda. Everything I've heard you talk about is shoulda, woulda, and coulda. Tell me where we need to go from now forward. That's what I'm interested in, because that's something we can impact. We can't impact
That's right.
what's been done.
That's right.
You can talk about Bill 19. It won't be Bill 19 next session. So talk to me about what can be done starting now, because now is the time we need to start doing our work for the next session, not when it starts.
That is right. I agree with that. My boss, Michael Sullivan at Empower Texans, is fond of calling, there's the legislative session, and then there is accountability season. We are in accountability season now. Every one of these guys deserves a challenge, a strong challenge, and it's going to require hard work from us, particularly between now and next March and into the runoffs in April. And then, in certain areas of the state where this is still competitive, we're going to have to do some work into November. You can't reform a guy who votes to ban, to create a special privilege for himself and ban filming in the Capitol and allow legislators to sue their own constituents. You can't fix that. You cannot reform that. You can't sit down and say, well, let me explain why you were wrong. They have to be removed. And we need a real shot this time. What's interesting is this last cycle in the Senate, you actually had a wave of conservatives move in, and a lieutenant governor and conservative statewide elected comptroller, attorney general. You had just a complete sea change in the Senate. The Democrats used to control the legislative agenda there. Conservatives passing good bills in the Senate. It's going to tip and happen in the House eventually, and we need to make great progress on it right now. We need to make great progress on it right now. So the only answer is hard work. We absolutely have to recruit candidates. I mean, if nobody else will do it, folks in this room, you need to stand up and do it yourselves. You have to have good, solid challengers who go out and sweat. Because if we can move, I'm not sure what the number is in the House, but it's a doable number. If we can move enough seats in the House, we can break up that coalition government of Democrats and liberal Republicans. Just like what was done in the Senate. There were enough, get a critical mass, and they were able to do it in the Senate. It can be done in the House. It may not happen next session, but it's coming. We keep making ground every 2 years. We had almost nothing 6 or 8 years ago. I mean, I told this, I worked in 2009 as a legislative aide for Wayne Christian, who was kind of a conservative leader at that time, and he paid a price for it in redistricting whenever that rolled around. But I worked with him. The concept back in 2007 or 2009 of an incumbent representative opposing one of their fellow representatives for re-election was just the furthest thing from anything anybody would ever do. Now you have these guys openly holding others accountable, getting involved in the campaigns. It's starting to break open the club mentality of we're all in this kind of social club in Austin, and it's about us and what we can do, and not how do we serve our constituents and how do we put that first. It's breaking down in Austin right now at a very rapid pace. You have the lobby in Austin complaining about the way this session went, saying we no longer control things. And in fact, what's crazy with this filming, I heard this today, these filming deals is the bar. There's a bar that's like from here to the front of the building, from the Capitol, called the Cloak Room. The Cloak Room is a hurting for business because the lobbyists and the legislators don't want to be seen on tape together. We're breaking down an entire culture in the town, and it'll take time, but frankly, we've got to get more out of there. And so it's a hard work thing. That's the only answer.
We got to wrap it up, so
okay.
One quick wrap up.
All right, last.
Yeah, one thing is, it might take.
Let me get your mic, please.
Yeah.
One thing is that it can often take 2 cycles, even 3 cycles, to get one of these guys out with. We got some guys that ran last time. They got 40-some%. They're running again. And what I think is really important, even if we don't think we can get them out this time, we can't give them a pass. They have to have an opponent.
That's right. Yeah, I agree. We've seen this time and time again when good challengers run, sometimes they come up short. If they do it again and they stick with it, they can win the next time. And so it is always worthwhile to hold them accountable. And in fact, you sometimes get better behavior from the representatives just because they're challenged.
Amen.
So anyway, thank you all very much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.